I was wondering if this calendar change gives us any leeway so that we could possibly set a graduation date and then just stick with that.
The reason, well, you can set a graduation date. The reason that we don't is because we wait until the spring when we're pretty sure that there's going to be no more snow days, and then we count the hours and the days that students are in class to ensure that we've met our requirement with the state. Otherwise, there could be a fine attached to that. That's why we don't do it.
And this is 15, 16, so we haven't set this year's graduation date yet. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's coming up.
Right.
It's been discussed already. People are already complaining about this year's, and I'm thinking if there's any way we could jump on top of it and get any changes that we need to do that we could possibly, and I understand the problems, but it's going to come up.
Two quick things. I think the extra time and it's starting after Labor Day is going to help our staff. Our custodians and maintenance staff is going to have to go in behind this work that's being done and do setups, floor cleaning, finishes, any couple little things after that phase is done. So I think it's going to take the pressure off an already pressured custodial maintenance department this summer. They're going to be under the gun. And I think being in that position myself, what I do, I would love to have extra time knowing that I can, get this done. And my second part of the question was, since we're going to vote on this and I assume do this, is there any feel for the community as if this is something we could do every year now from going out? I come from an area, we always started after Labor Day, and I've never kind of got the gist of why. I think the community, for vacations and everything in the summer, I would hope that maybe they would like to start after Labor Day, May. So after we do this next year, maybe we can get some feedback on how the community thinks about that, and maybe it's something we can do going forward on a regular basis. Just a thought.
Well, I think that there are trade-offs, having lived in both environments, right? I mean, ending school later in June when it's hot and uncomfortable is a downside. But to your point, they start school and then they have 2 days off for Labor Day, and it's disruptive. So, yeah. So I don't know. From that perspective, I see pros and cons, and I tend to agree with you, though, that after Labor Day might be the better way to go.
Any other questions? Mr. Hanna, do we have any plans built in, say we lose a day for the weather, or, is there leeway or are we on a day-by-day schedule?
I can tell you the gym and the cafeteria, the schedules set up for those there was plenty of time. We missed some milestone days because of weather, but the whole duration was enough time to get it done. The cap edition has kind of hit a standstill because the weather closed in, inhibiting the next phase, which is masonry. You need optimum time to lay masonry so it doesn't freeze. But there was enough time in that phasing schedule to get those 2 additions done. I don't see those as being a problem.
And do you feel as though this week is enough time, even barring, some bad, that we'll have enough to get it done?
A lot of the work now is happening inside the building.
Inside, okay.
So like yesterday, there were still activities going on. Even though you didn't have school, there were construction activities occurring. Today, there were construction activities occurring.
Okay.
In fact, and you'll see in my presentation, even while school was off over the holiday, they got the heating pipe in that you gave me permission to let them do over that. We had the heat off in here and they ran that pipe. So all the contractors trying to maximize as much time as they have, getting ready to start what's going to be one of the most difficult phases of this project.
I did have one more question, but by taking the extra week, giving you the extra week in the summer, aren't we essentially stealing a week next summer?
Next summer's work isn't as aggressive as this. I mean, that's a good way to look at it. I don't think you're stealing a week. I just think this phase is very aggressive.
But we're finishing the project in that last, next summer,
Yeah.
the summer after this, right?
Yeah,
So everything that has to be done when school is out, and we're squeezing, of course, we could just start school after Labor Day again.
Yeah, but it's not as much work as what has to occur this summer.
Okay.
Last question, and that is, don't we have, if the contractor does not hit benchmarks,
There is liquidated damages.
right.
There is liquidated damages.
So are we extending out those as well by giving them
You
the
wouldn't
extra?
extend liquidated damages.
But those are based off time.
Those are based on time. Deadlines of each phase. Each phase has a liquidated damage. If you don't finish this phase by this time, there's a liquidated damage.
So I guess what I'm saying, by extending this, are we saying that we're?
No, you're not.
Okay, understood.
Here's an example. If there's a change, like what occurred in the music room, they're going to put in a change order that I need 5 more days. If they ask a question, if there's something that's not clear in there, that they send a request for information, they're going to say, this request for information cost me a day, cost me 2 days. You know what I mean? I couldn't order the material yet. I didn't know what to do. So this is what we're going to deal with this summer. I just know. You know, it's a renovation. Unforeseen things are going to occur, and anything that's unclear, any little change, they're going to say, I need more time.
To that topic specifically, since we don't necessarily have regular board meetings over the summer, we'd like you to consider whether we could gain some authorization to proceed with things via email until our next meeting, because if we hit something like we hit in with the flooring in the music room, if we hit something like that in the educational wing, we may not be able to wait 2 or 3 weeks until we have another meeting to get board approval, or else we may be looking at 2 or 3 weeks of delay in that section of the project. So something to consider. We don't need action on it tonight, but just for discussion purposes and later.
We'll have to discuss that later. Just kidding. All right, we're going to move into, is there any comment from the public on the calendar draft? Comment? No? All right, policy committee?
Good evening.
We're on schedule.
Tonight we have 2 policies to go over tonight. First of all, policy 217, graduation requirement. This will be a revision. You've had an opportunity to look at this, and also policy 121, field trip policy, and that'll be a discussion item after we talk about graduation. One of the things that we wanted to do, based on Chapter 4 updates, as well as curriculum changes that occurred at the high school and throughout the district, college courses that are now offered off-site, as well as dual enrollment courses that are offered on-site and off-site. And finally, we want our graduation policy or our requirements to reflect the Pottsgrove program of study. If you take a look at the policy that was last drafted on February 10th, 2009, the policy really doesn't reflect the things that I just mentioned. So one of the things that we wanted to do here, after meeting with the district office staff, we wanted the policy to reflect those particular updates. So if you would take a look at the policy that we have for you tonight for revision. If you take a look at page 2 of 4, it talks about early college admissions. I mean, that is one thing now we allow our high school students to do, is to look at early college admissions while they're in high school. You can see that the changes are made in yellow for that particular area. That migrates over to page 3 of 4. It talks about to a graduate to be an honor student. We tried to make that consideration too. We did not want to penalize a student who decided to spend time outside campus. We also wanted that to be able to reflect back on them as a high quality student if they so earned that. One of the things, though, I would like to mention is to be a valedictorian or a commencement speaker, the student shall be a full-time member of the home school. We did not want anybody who decided to spend half their career or more outside of our building, outside of the district, outside of the high school, to be considered that. We wanted them to, the recommendation from the group was that they were part of that high school team throughout their high school career. Now, that doesn't take away somebody, who does dual enrollment or goes to the community college or to another university or for Lehigh program, something like that, to be counted. That does count, but someone who's a full-time person who decides to leave us their junior and senior year, we felt was in the best interest of the kids who are here and taking part of the high school, the whole academics and extracurricular, there'd be a separation there. We did talk about part-time admissions, which I just mentioned there on page 3 of 4, and then basically we wanted to spell out for you the credit requirements at the bottom, and then that reflects on page 4 of 4, and basically this reflects our program of study that we currently have. We have 23 credits for each student to graduate from Pottsgrove. Keeping in mind that because we are a regular scheduled high school, we have 28 opportunities for our students to receive credit. So we are taking up 23 of those 28 spots. That allows students to take extra math, science, English, social studies in those particular areas of interest, and it also allows for makeup work if need be for students who possibly could fall behind. The credit distribution, as you can see, follows a chart, and it talks about the units of credit as well as the different course titles that were offered. If I may note, at the bottom, the graduation project, which has been a project that has been around for quite a while. We are going to complete that through the class of 2015 and 16. The committee felt that because of all the extra testing that goes on and the commitment with Keystone exams, that this extra commitment was not one that we wanted to continue. We felt that it was more of a value academically for our students to concentrate on the areas that the students are tested on, and also giving them an opportunity to pursue other areas of interest. So at this time, obviously, my committee consists of our chair, Matt, and then Rick, and then Justin. If you have any comments immediately, then we'll farm it out to the rest of the board.
One of my questions was about the graduation project, which you answered partially, but I guess devil's advocate, I know that there was some changes in the state requirements related to the graduation project. Are we prohibited from dropping the project in 2016?
Yes.
So we can't do it until 2017?
Well, what we thought, we already have our student population involved. We have this year's senior class and next year's junior class already involved with the graduation process. We don't have our sophomores and we don't have our freshmen involved in that process. We just didn't want to have an abrupt ending to that process. We wanted to have it phased out.
Well, I mean, you know, if I've been working on this project for a year and then you say, oh, never mind, that might be upsetting to the student. But I just wonder if the reason we're dropping it is because of the other pressures and testing pressures on our students, then aren't we consigning them to sort of having extra pressure? And might some of them say, you know what, I don't mind that I put a year into this if I don't have to finish it? I'm just asking. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that to be true. I do think that that to do a graduation project right, it has to be embedded more in the curriculum than we do it now. And I just speak to that as someone who was a building administrator, who had it embedded in the curriculum, who had it monitored, you know, by a classroom teacher and saw it through from start to finish, where I could say as a building administrator that it was a quality piece of work. It was a quality piece of writing. It was a quality presentation, and it had significance meaning to that student in their career. I don't know, after talking to Dr. Ziegler and the high school staff and conversations I've had, with Mr. Voris and Ms. Feola, I don't know if that's a true statement here. And for us at this time to go back and revamp curriculum, and at this time, and to create opportunities, a career opportunity, I think it's better spent with what we have in our program of study and moving forward with some of our honors courses, AP courses, the STEM program, and other opportunities that we now have at the Western Center.
I agree with you. I'm just wondering whether we should drop the project earlier, but I'm wondering, and, I defer, but I'm asking. So.
I guess the ex-principal in me would say no. I would like them to see that through. They started it, and I would like them to see it through, and then just work with those students along the way, if you will, to get them to completion.
I just have one quick question, Dr. Shirk. For the valedictorian, for the commencement speaker, the student has to be a full-time member of our home school. Does this not include students that go to the Western Center?
No, they are an extension of our high school or of our classroom, so they are included. But that's a good point. Maybe we can look at changing some of that, the verb. But
Maybe just clear up the wording a little bit to ensure that 3 years from now we can interpret it. Maybe we'll put something in parentheses. Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Because they are part of our school.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
any other discussion on the graduation policy?
Matt, did you have anything else?
I do have a question or a comment, Mr. Shirk. It has to do with the graduation project specifically. Has the administration or the principals and the teachers thought of any way of replacing that, where it's not called a graduation project anymore, but where it is something, though, that I would say, because I'm going to say I think the graduation project had a value to most students in the past, and it was worthwhile for them to do, no matter what they did it in. And I was wondering if there's something that we could have the students do of a similar value to them, whether it's looking for the future career that they actually do while they're in high school. I don't know if that was discussed as an option. Again, I don't know that you would want to call it a graduation project. In my mind, it could be something just incorporated into the curriculum today.
Yeah, Mr. Faulkner, good question. Yes, we do have a career class now. We have, I think we have 4 or 5 sections of that, and so our students do have an opportunity to do career inventory, to take time to, basically dig into a particular career, do research on it, and then come up with a proposal or a career track along with that. But with that said, also, our guidance department has a tool that we use called Naviance, and they embed that already. It's embedded throughout the district, but they do embed those career surveys and career components as they meet with the students coming through. So it's not a total disregard for that career component. We're just filtering the kids that do sign up for career have the opportunity to explore and their paths, as well as the guidance department. One of their goals is to make sure that every student follows that Naviance path and follows the protocol that's already set up in that.
And Patty just reminded me of a question. I'm sorry to do this out of order. When you brought up the Western Center, so the question relates to the calendar. Is there any impact on the Western Center by this change of calendar?
Typically, we have seen disparate calendars, but I am going to have that conversation tomorrow when I meet with the 3 superintendents, myself and the other 2, and the director.
I had a question, once again, going back to the the graduation project since my daughter's a junior and she's a fairly conscientious student, but I haven't heard anything about her graduation project or what she's doing. I'm wondering if the current juniors are really dug in that far into it. And like you say, we're going to be offering, there was a list of, somewhere in our packet of all these new courses. We're going to be offering a lot of extra AP courses and dual enrollment. I wonder if it would be more helpful to this junior class to say, you know what, instead of spending this time on this graduation project, which, you know, many of them spend, you know, hours and hours, dozens of hours on, instead take that time that you have and pursue an AP course or pursue a dual enrollment course. Just for me and for my daughter, I think that would be more productive to her and her education rather than to spend some time on something that they might otherwise be doing. I know a lot of kids that spend their time doing, you know, an Eagle Scout project, or they're already doing service or something like that. We really are trying to encourage these kids to take more AP classes, to take more dual enrollment classes. And if we're really starting to focus on that, I think maybe we should focus on that instead of a graduation project. Unless they're already really dug in, maybe if it could be an optional thing. Or to say, as your graduation project, try an AP class or try a dual enrollment. So I don't know if that's an option or not, but I kind of agree with Rick on this one. If it's not, you know, let's spend our time wisely on the things that we really want to focus on.
And point well taken. I know Dr. Ziegler, obviously he's not here tonight. He's got another commitment, I think, within the district. He's coming eventually. I know. And Mr. Vorse, would you add anything to that, or Mr. Wagman, that he couldn't add? I think, you know, we toiled this one, to be honest with you. We did. It wasn't something we just said 16, 15, 16. We toiled that. We toiled the value of that. And I guess we just didn't want, you know, I think we at the end of the day was like, you know, we wanted to continue with the value that was already established with this, you know, with this original intent of graduation project. But as the board, obviously, if that's a wish, I mean, that's why we're here tonight. You know, our goal was to see it through to completion because they'd already started it. But that is something that you could decide as a group, and you know, we could move forward tonight.
Is there a way to get input from the class to get their feelings on it? Do you think that will be?
You mean the students?
You got to be careful what you ask for. What do you want?
I'm telling you, the kids really look forward to that graduation project. If you would ask the kids, they would rather have the graduation project. That's a big thing. When my daughter did it, all her friends were just ecstatic. They loved it. They did it together. Some of them, you know, they for ideas, but it was just something that they've been doing for so long. Not saying we can't change. Don't get me wrong. But if you were to poll the kids, I think they would. If they were given a choice, they'll take the graduation project over the Keystones any day. But if you ask them how they felt about the graduation project, they're going to tell you they like it.
With all due respect, when I was 16, I would not have been into doing a graduation project. That's just me. So.
One thing I like to add, I just hate to see the students that have already started, it just come to a halt for them. You know, because I know they do work hard and it means a lot to them. But to stop now, I don't think it would be fair to the students.
Well, you know, I'm looking here at you know, the class of 2015, which are the seniors now. Their project should be done. And the class of 2016, now when my girls were juniors, at this time, they were getting ready to present their senior projects. They had done all their work pretty much through the summer after their sophomore year, and then were writing up everything the beginning of their junior year, and then after Christmas break, junior year, You know, that was when that, but, I mean, and that
But
was now.
can I
you know-
just interrupt for a second? Kyle checked the code, chapter 4, because the regulations changed, which is why we're even having this conversation. But I think this is a moot point because they have to do it through 2016, so we can't change that.
I just want to point out that was my first question, so.
Yeah, and when I first sat down, I thought Bill had it. I hadn't looked at the regs, but he.
I knew there was a method in my madness.
She might be Dutch. She's one of those kids.
Thank you, Kyle.
Any other questions? Any questions from the public? Mr. Leach?
I just ask a quick question, as in I have 2 juniors as well. Does anybody know how far they are in this project? Because I can tell you right now, my kids have done absolutely nothing.
Okay, good. It's not just mine.
And they're in all the honors, all the AP classes. I mean, my son's got 4 or 5 AP classes and stuff. They've done nothing.
I could tell you, I probably had the most recent student that's graduated, gone through the system. He was a senior, graduated this past June. They finished, most of the students, the juniors, finished their project by the end of their junior year. They were presenting through March through May. For the most part, they're presenting their projects, is the way it's supposed to work.
Can I say that, has anything been told to the junior class? Because. Oh, sure. You're saying, oh, sure. I can tell you right now, I can pull 15 juniors right now, and they'll say, nothing's been done.
Well, Mr. Leach, we can check, but just to say something to Mr. Faulkner, they're doing things a little bit different because we were in the process of transitioning over to perhaps a more career-focused, utilizing the Naviance software as part of the project when Chapter 4 then changed the regulations. So we'll follow up with the high school administration, Dr. Ziegler, and the guidance counselors, and we'll make sure that we'll check to see where they are, because to be honest with you, that's not something that we're looking at every day. Yeah, but thank you for bringing it up.
Okay, if there's any more further questions, I know we went to talk about policy 121, and Ms. Feola, you're going to lead our discussion.
Yeah. I wanted to bring to your attention an issue with the field trips. I had conversation with several board members following the last board meeting. An issue was brought to my attention whereby there were some parents in the district that are upset that we're not running a particular field trip. And the issue was brought to my attention that the current 6th grade students are not being offered the trip to New York City this year that apparently they have been offered in the past. And we were in conversation about the fact that as 5th graders, that was the last year that they were, that we didn't offer the camping trip last year. And if you recall, that created quite a stir in the community. And at the time, and I explained to you that the teachers just really were feeling overwhelmed in having to organize these trips. It's not just the organization of the trip itself, but it's all the fundraising that goes into it. It's the collecting of the monies, it's storing the monies, making sure they're following protocol. It's keeping track of how many students are signed up, how many students are not going, what are they going to do with the students that are not going. It taxed our district in the sense that we were pulling staff from all over the district from various buildings, and students were losing their instruction in their classrooms because we needed another male chaperone or another female chaperone, and we thus had to pull them from various classrooms for the trip. And we were able to solve the problem to some level of satisfaction. Some people weren't satisfied that we no longer had a 3-day trip, but then others were satisfied that we were able to offer an extended 1-day trip. What they found out in that trip, however, is that it ended up being a very long day with a lot of time on the bus and not as much time as they would have liked in an activity that was enjoyable and aligned with our curriculum and focused for the students. So therein lies another issue that is starting to rise to the surface, and I asked Mrs. Williams to be here this evening, that our 5th grade teachers are not sure that they want to do that extended day field trip that they did last year, which happened to be to Washington, D.C. They went to Washington, D.C. because the 6th graders were going to New York, because that was brought up as a possibility, but the 6th graders were going, and they thought, well, we'll do something different. The 6th graders will probably get to go to New York when they're in 6th grade. Now we are fast forward a year, and we have our 6th grade teachers that are for the very same reasons as articulated very eloquently by the 5th grade teachers last year, feeling like they're not sure that they want to take the trip because of the reasons that I mentioned, coupled with the fact that now that the volunteer requirements for all of our chaperones have now become a new requirement, that they have all their clearances, coupled with the fact that we continue to have additional medically fragile or students requiring medication and other types of needs that are just very scary for a classroom teacher to take on that additional responsibility, and they don't want that liability. They don't want to feel that pressure and take that responsibility on, coupled with the fact that I think they see the inequities in some of our students who aren't able to afford such trips and are feeling like, if we're offering a curriculum, an aligned curriculum, that all students should be exposed to what we're offering, or we shouldn't be offering it just for some children and not other children. So they brought that to Dr. Ramage's attention, and I heard about this obviously through a couple of you who had heard about it through the grapevine from some parents. But I since followed up with Dr. Ramage, and he explained to me what their position was. I talked with Mrs. Williams, and then we had a full discussion about it at a cabinet meeting. And I guess we're feeling that we are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because while we feel that some of these trips are really exciting for kids, and they're nice to do, they're not necessarily a requirement of an aligned curriculum. What I asked the cabinet to do is kind of look at our board policy on field trips. So we kind of took a look at our board policy, and I put one in your packet today. And this was obviously developed way back in 2004 and then updated through the years in 07, 08, and then most recently February of 2013. And really, if you look at that policy, it talks about the purpose of our field trips. The purpose is to afford a firsthand educational experience not available in the typical setting. It talks about field trips that are designed by district personnel to stimulate student interest and inquiry, provide opportunities for social growth and development, and are a worthwhile extension of the classroom. But then it goes on to say, to the extent that they provide the most effective means for accomplishing curriculum objectives, field trips may be authorized by the building principal. The other thing that I think is important in this policy says to be educationally beneficial, there has to be advanced preparation, opportunities for pupils to assimilate and experience during and at the end of trips. So they're not supposed to be just fun trips, but they're supposed to be actually part of the educational learning experience. And then it says staff members will be expected to consider the following factors in the selection of these trips: the value of the activity to the particular class or group, the relationship of the field trip activity to a curricular objective, the suitability of the activity and distance traveled in terms of the age level of the student, the health and safety issues that they're facing, and the mode and availability of transportation, and then lastly, cost. And I guess in reflecting on this and having this conversation with Cabinet, I'm not sure that we have adhered to this policy the way in which it was written and intended. I think sometimes we've, deviated, and I think sometimes it was spurred by teacher interest or a particular group's interest, and not necessarily focused directly on what the policy said. So I guess I want to bring this to your attention and have this conversation and understand that this board feels the same way in terms of what the policy says and what's articulated in the policy, and then maybe just extend this to a broader group and maybe we need to reiterate to the community what it is we're about once we figure this out, because I think the times are changing. There's a lot of different factors now that need to be considered more than perhaps they were in the past. And I'm not sure that everyone understands all of the variables that come into play here. And maybe we need to communicate those variables as best we can out to the community, and then hold by whatever it is that we agree to as our policy. The other thing I wanted to mention is I was told that there was a choral group or a music group that wants to go to New York City. And of course, that's in the 6th grade as well. So if that trip goes forward, you have the lion's share of the children that aren't in choral group or whatever group it is. I'm not sure. I don't want to quote me on that. Music, band, choral. but then they would go and then the other kids wouldn't. Well, again, I went back to the policy and I asked Dr. Ramage to do that. And we looked at it together, and when you look on page 2 and 3, you can see that we have language for educational trip, which is what I was quoting just a few minutes ago. We have language for interscholastic and competitive trip. We have language for extracurricular trip, and we have language for civic trip. And essentially this group, this choral group, would be an extracurricular trip, because it's a group that practices outside of school. It's part of an extracurricular activity. And it says right in there, field trips of which are of special value to a school-related or school-sponsored organization may be permitted, provided they meet the demonstrated needs and objectives of the organization. So in other words, if the organization was built for a certain purpose and they were traveling somewhere because of that purpose, then we should approve that trip. But if they're just going because it's a fun thing to do, then according to our current board policy, we really shouldn't be approving that. So I asked Dr. Ramage to consider that as he's receiving these requests, and I've kind of reminded our building principals that until the board changes the policy, that we need to really adhere to this policy and follow it to the best that we can. And we also, I think, need to understand as a board and a community that you can only tax our teachers so much, and we can't continue to expect that they go above and beyond when they are going above and beyond, but this is above and beyond, above and beyond. And sometimes it just becomes too much, and because of those factors that are that come into play with the money and who can afford it and the medical needs of students and all of those different things, that I think at some point it becomes a little bit too much, and I think we need to be more prudent in what trips we are approving to ensure that they truly meet the objectives of the policy and of the district. So I just want to throw that out for conversation and, you know, obviously get your feedback, but that's kind of where we are right now.
I think the only thing worse than canceling the 6th grade trip to New York, well, it's not really canceled because it hasn't really been scheduled this year, would be to cancel trips that students in chorus or whatever the extracurricular groups are have come to believe are going to happen. I understand the policy reasons that you've put forth. They're logical and correct, but to pull a trip that a kid expects out from under him or her at this time of the year would just, I think, exacerbate the situation. Though it's a no-win because you get the charge. You know, why are some kids getting to go and other kids not getting to go? And I totally understand that that's a problem. I just think that there are going to be a lot of really disappointed kids and thus a lot of disappointed parents if you say, well, I know we were planning to go to New York, but it's not consistent with our educational policy, so sorry. I think that would be a much better thing to start next year.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention, though, is it's very clear in our policy and our regulations that govern the trips that trips aren't supposed to be advertised until they're approved by the building principal. And it's my understanding that that choral trip has not been approved by the building principal, so I'm not sure where we are in this, so just understand that it's...
And yet, the kids already know about it. The parents already know about it.
I guess one thing I can add, maybe in terms of some information, as Ms. Feola mentioned...
Can you step up to the mic?
Yeah.
Dave, sorry.
I'll move the mic for you.
Stay back here.
Stay back here?
Yeah, so I can see you.
Okay. As Ms. Feola just mentioned, the policy items, of course, come into play. And in some ways, it's a stretch to say that even, and you know, if you know me, you know I'm a supporter of the arts, right? I mean, I think it's fantastic. Broadway, you know, great experience. Some of our kids won't get there. But right now, the rationale would probably be, well, live drama is a genre inside reading, writing, speaking, and listening as part of the ELA curriculum. And you could perhaps argue that, but I would also argue that's not a real tight connection to our planned course and curriculum at the middle level. So that's one piece I think that relates very directly to the existing policy. The advertised trip was not really for 6th grade only. It was a handful of our organizations sending out to say, I think it was our Fuel Up to Play 60 coordinator and our Falcon Helpers, and just some of the organizations that exist inside our school. Their plan was to offer this out to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who would be interested in the trip at the cost of $160 per person. So the other one I would highlight in our policy is number 6 in the criteria, the cost. I mean, I'm concerned that perhaps some of our families that would never have the availability to take a student to Broadway are the very students who we're sort of excluding from this kind of opportunity inside the school system as well. So I think that's a piece of it. But it didn't come through. It was not signed off and approved based on the policy. It's just like it's been going on long enough that I think the word is out there. Oh yeah, 6th grade does this, 5th grade does this, seniors do this. I think it's more of that thread that went on than any kind of outright communication, because our 6th grade teachers, I think as early as the opening parent conferences, basically downplayed a field trip, by absence, by normally what we've done is not fundraising, but sort of a payment plan opportunity, and that was never indicated. So I think the writing was on the wall in some regard that it has to end, or it may end at some point. Some 6th grade class is going to be the one that doesn't go to New York City. And it may have started with some very energetic, involved teachers whenever it was, before I came to Pottsgrove. You can't just, you don't sign on as a 6th grade teacher and then read the fine print and says, by the way, you have to go to New York City. You have to go to New York City. So I think we understand that aspect of it. So I think it's kind of all coming together. And certainly when some of that was distributed in a more formalized manner, and then I started hearing about it, and you guys started hearing about it, that's when I think it's prudent to go and revisit the field trip piece, and where do we want it to come into play. If it was a Saturday trip that they were proposing, there may be no discussion at all. It's families who would be interested. It's an extracurricular piece. It's something they're doing on a weekend. But we're talking about losing, a full instructional day, and that's why, in part, we're paying so much attention to what's already in place.
Just a couple comments. First of all, I'm a believer in the field trips. I think they're invaluable, especially when we do them in accordance with, what the students are doing in school. I think if it corresponds with their education. But let's clear this up a little bit. And some people may not want to say this, but I'm going to say it. This all started because the time it took away from the classroom, the teachers not having the time anymore due to other requirements, not being able to organize it, fundraise it, the whole 9 yards. When this happened, what was it, last year or the year before? Last year. I was surprised that maybe we couldn't have these parents step up who are, homeroom parents or classroom parents step up and spearhead the fundraising, spearhead that aspect of it so the teachers didn't have to do that, okay? Like Dr. Ramage just said, every grade expects, because the last grade did it, the camping trip. Well, and like you said, it has to end. Does it have to end? Yeah, I think we can get people involved. I understand. I know come the end of this year, anybody in the school district that volunteers, administration, teachers, anybody dealing with kids by the end of this year has to have it done, the certification done, and every 3 years after that, which hasn't been happening because the law has been very vague. Now it's been changed. I think we can get plenty of parents to do that. We're going to have plenty of parents to do that anyway because they're volunteering here all the time. I think we need to put our heads together. We should adhere by the policy that we have, but I don't think we should say everything's off the board. I think we need to get a plan together that when the art class wants to go to the art museum, it's going to cost money. They need to fundraise. They need to get the money together to do it. It's going to cost, $36 per student. That's where the parents got to come in and help. But those things like the art museum for the art kids or these other places that we go for the school for what their courses are, I think we really need to work hard in making sure they happen. Because if we just take everything away and say we can't do it, blah, 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 I think, yes, do we go to some places that aren't lined with the curriculum? Sure. But but I think we need to make sure that we do go to these places for these students that's aligned with their curriculum, that would help them get an experience in what they're doing and learn more about what they're doing in school. Those things we have to really work hard at, put forward, and make sure they happen. That's what I like to see. I like to see the extra effort go with that instead of the frivolous.
Mrs. Williams, do you want to comment on how that went last year when you?
Last year we had several, well, I would say about 30 parents at our PTA meeting discussing their concerns about the trip. When I asked for volunteers, I had about 5 mothers meet me. But actually who planned the trip was myself, my secretary, and the guidance counselor. So parents can only really put in so much time because they are working adults as well. But I did have about 5 to come in and brainstorm, but it took hours for myself, the guidance counselor, and my secretary to plan the trip for the 5th graders.
The reality also is that for like the New York City trip, there was no fundraising. It was a payment plan. Last year, I went last year as a chaperone, and I paid for myself plus my son. It was $145, I believe, a pop in 4 payments, which wasn't onerous for me, thankfully, but certainly is a large enough amount that it could be onerous for members of the community, and I think that's a valid concern. On the other hand, the thing I keep thinking about is what a great day it was for our kids. And like it or not, they're not going because it fits some they weren't going because it fits some educational policy. They were going because it was a tradition, for one, and for two, because it was viewed by the students and the parents as a reward for a hard year's work. And also, I keep thinking about the fact that some of these kids may never have been to a place like New York. In fact, I remember speaking with several kids on the bus who told me they'd never been to New York City before, which boggles me because I'm from there, and so it's something that's been part of my life, my whole life. And I just think it was a great opportunity for these kids. I totally get we can't require the teachers to do something that A, they don't want to do, or B, that they feel that they can't do. I'm very empathetic. I don't know what the solution is. I'm just very sad that we've come to a place where this tradition appears as if it has to go away. But I also want to reemphasize, I completely disagree with not going forward with the trip that you mentioned, Dave. I may be the only one, but I just think that it'll be a public relations nightmare, and it's just mid-year. You just don't pull the rug out from under people. If you want to do that next year, great. Let everybody know it's going away. This is the last year. But to take it away in the middle of the year when there are expectations, whether they should have been advertised or not, is just going to be a nightmare. And I just don't agree with it.
Is that trip offered to everyone, Dave, or just a select group of students? So it's my understanding that those other parents that might have gotten the trip through the 6th grade broad category are now going to be upset because those kids got to go, but my kid didn't. So how do you answer to that? Because that's the other side of the coin.
There is no answer. Some people are going to be upset no matter what we do. And certainly those 6th grade parents are all going to be upset because of the feeling like everything that their kids were supposed to get has been taken away. I don't know any way around that. I don't really think that taking it away from other kids is going to really make them feel any better, though. It might enrage them slightly more, but they're already mad. So it just increases the number of people who are going to be mad. Like I said, my personal opinion, it's just going from bad to worse.
I'll just say, I mean, this got my feathers ruffled, and I have a lot of things to say about this subject, but in the same meeting, we argued to drop a student senior project early, which it does have an educational value, but we're arguing against dropping a field trip. I just think that sends the wrong message on the whole to a student. This is school. I don't think either. I mean, I'll be sorry to see the senior project go because I know there's value there, but I understand times are a-changing. And same with the field trips. But I read the field trip policy when this came to the table last year, and I read it again when it came this year. I will say I'm a parent of a 9th grader who also did not get to participate in the 5th grade field trip or the 6th grade field trip because they were canceled for different reasons. One was canceled because of the Ringing Rocks renovation, and then I don't know why they didn't go on the 6th grade field trip, but I can see where if we're studying the Civil War, we go on a trip to Gettysburg. We're studying early American history. When I went to New York City, I went to the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. I did not go to a wax museum and out to eat. I don't see educational value in that. So, yes, it was a fun trip. Can the students get used to not being rewarded for a hard year's work? I think so. But I definitely feel like there's a place for field trips. They do have educational value. If you're studying Shakespeare, People's Light is right down the road, and they are fantastic. And those are good field trips. There's value there. I remember them. It's a distant memory, so I have to talk about it before I forget altogether. But those places are there. Philadelphia's right there. It has everything to offer educationally that New York does. I'm a Philly person, so I'll argue for Philly. But it doesn't have to be a 3-day trip. I know for young kids, I went to Washington, D.C., but I was a senior in high school, so they let us off the bus, go see the Smithsonian, be back here at 6, and we got home really late, and that was okay because we were 17, 18 years old. It's a long day for a 5th grader. But we were trying to make people happy who were very upset about the cancellation of the camping trip. So it's my feeling there's definitely a place for field trips. They have educational value. There's some of my best memories of being in high school and junior high, and because they were fun and because they were educational. So I've taken my kids to do things on as a family event that were recreational field trips that my teachers took me on. I'll also say that as a board, if we sit there and we take the time to review the special payment schedule for people who are getting paid to organize these things, that it does kind of establish an expectation to not be able to say, yeah, you guys took the time to approve it, but I don't feel like doing it now. If it's on there, I feel like there's an expectation. I know it's hard. I know that the students have there's a lot more special needs out there than there were 30 years ago, but if we establish an expectation, we should follow through on that expectation. I mean, those are my feelings. I think it's a good policy. I think that the field trips should be directly connected to the curriculum at the time, and not for fun, and only fun. So if we can do that and find a way to keep it alive, and like Mrs. Williams said, find a way to engage other resources, if it's parents or whatever it is, instead of just having 30 people come out to complain or 5 people come out to brainstorm and then not do anything. If we can find a way to keep them engaged and get some of that work done, because there's a lot more work involved, I think it's worth the time to keep the policy, keep the field trips as much as we can, and it does help keep the students engaged, I think, to have a little break and go do something that's a little bit fun but directly connected to their curriculum too.
I just have one quick thing. Sometimes I think, because I've organized things so many times, why parents just couldn't get a bus and do it with a group that they want to do and not include our students. If you wanted just a handful to go and not everybody, just, hey, this is the price, this is the trip, you want to go? You want to go to Rockefeller Center like I did with my family this year? We got on a bus, we went together, and it didn't include, my granddaughter's school or anything. So, and I totally agree with you, Matt, totally agree with you. Secondly, one of my biggest things that I think we've been through this before, and I'm not sure if it's in the policy, we have to watch and make sure nobody's getting any kickbacks from this, because I know we have encountered that in the past, where I'll organize it, but I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to get a little kickback here and get something for a perk. And that put us in an awkward position. So we really have to make sure that that does not happen.
And that's articulated in the anti-fraud policy, Patty. It's policy 821. Yeah.
Patty, I think that part of the problem for parents, I personally wouldn't mind sending my kid on a bus with this leader, with people, school personnel who are, you know, basically taking care of him every day of the year and have all their clearances and you know, are as trustworthy as I can get in this world. Whereas sending my kid off on a bus with without me actually going, with something organized by community members that I don't know, I just don't think that I think that would make a lot of parents uncomfortable.
Yeah, but you would be included.
Well, then every parent has to go with their kid.
That's right.
And I could just
That's
take them to
right.
New York in my car, too,
And there you go.
and save some money.
There you go. It doesn't have to be sponsored by the school.
I think I want to add, though, that I wasn't at the last board meeting, so I missed the whole conversation. But actually, when I came back from vacation, I work with a mother of a 6th grader who approached me at work and said, "What's the deal with this trip?" And I'm like, "What trip are you talking about?" So she explained everything that was on Facebook that I had no access to. And what I tried to explain to her was, and I think this is something that communication is key to all these parents. We have to inform them of the real reasons why they may not be able to go on this trip. And this mother had not, she was unaware of it. And basically I tried to break down to her, it's very similar to what happened last year with the 5th grade trip. Almost the exact same reasons, it just now applies to a different group of teachers. And once she heard that, she was actually okay with it. And I said, really, I feel if you want your child to go to New York City and have a great learning experience, they'll probably even learn more if you go as a family and you get to let your child experience what you feel is valuable versus just with classmates. And she's all for that. Besides her kid struggling, and he wasn't going to go anyway unless his grades improved, but that's besides the point. But that's my comment. I think we need to make sure all the parents get it communicated to them why it may not happen.
Well, that was part of the problem, though, because there was no communication to the parents in the beginning of the year who had been led to believe there was going to be a New York City trip. If that communication had occurred, then we would have been talking about this in September, not now.
I think the problem, though, is on a year-by-year basis, teachers kind of start these ideas. And if they have an idea, then they propose it, but it's not something that they're proposing to go on annually every year. So I think that's something that we just need to make clear to our community as well, that they're borne by the teachers that are on that team or in charge of that group or those types of things. So I think our community thought it was an annual event, but I don't know that our teachers thought it was an annual event.
Well, so
there
the communication was bad all around then.
A couple things. Number one, I think we need to manage expectations. That's one of the problems, was that there are some expectations out there. We just need to manage the expectations and say, these are the things that we do, and have it be consistent across grades and across the district. That's one thing. I work with a lot of financially struggling families, and it bothers me when there's a trip to New York for $145, and there is no way that many of these families could pay $145 to go on a trip. So when we say, well, this is a great opportunity for families who would otherwise never get to go, a good portion of those families are not going because they cannot afford it. So I don't think it's fair to those families. We have a lot of struggling families that cannot afford $145 for their kid to go to the Hard Rock Cafe and go and see Spider-Man. You know, I mean, that's, they need to feed their family. This is going to be, I mean, and we're going down this road. I agree with Matt that it should be tied to the curriculum. I think it should be local. It should be as inexpensive as possible. We should use our facilities that we have in our area. I mean, Philadelphia is right down the road. I grew up in Western Maryland where there's nothing but mountains and trees. You know, Philadelphia is right down the road. This is an amazing opportunity. Valley Forge, even Elmwood Park, Zoo, and, you know, things that are really close by. Marymead Farms. These are close, they're inexpensive, they're easily done in a day. So I think that we need to, and this is going to be hard because it's not going to be popular, but we need to, it's been enough time now that we've been struggling with this issue. And I think we just need to put our foot down and say, okay, this is what the policy is, this is what the expectation is. Now, I'm going to go someplace really, really unpopular, but I don't want this to happen later down on the road and continue having this. We have a senior trip. It is very expensive. It is very far away. It is a tradition. Is it tied to the curriculum? Do we want to go there? I mean, this is going to be an incredibly unpopular thing, but I don't want to get, you know, my daughter is a junior this year. She's going to be a senior next year. If she's not going on a senior trip to Florida, well, she's not anyway. She's not going to Florida. But if she's not going to do that, it would be nice to know now that they're not doing that. You know, there's no way her daddy's letting her go to Florida with a bunch of high school kids. But, I mean, I would rather know that now and manage that expectation now and say, you know, over the past couple years, there's been a lot of chatter on Facebook about, you know, how these seniors go on the senior trip and then they come back and do finals and how it's not a, you know, the best environment for preparing for finals. And, you know, and we can't set a firm graduation date because, and I don't know how many of the seniors actually go on that trip. So, I mean, this is, and I know I'm always the one, I'm willing to stick my neck out. I know this is incredibly unpopular, but I think that we need to address it because I don't want to have another year of something being, quote unquote, taken away from our kids that wasn't really going to happen to begin with. So I think we need to set a policy, do the hard work, just put our foot down and say, this is what we're doing.
Anyone else? I guess one thing I just want to add here is it's kind of a shame, I think, that we kind of came to this point. I mean, really, when you get down to it, and you know, you think my third grade teacher didn't really want to take me to the zoo, you know, or you know, she didn't feel like planning it.
Just you.
Yeah, I'm probably not. I mean, when we go back that far, I mean, that's a hard pill to kind of swallow if that's what we're really saying. And I hate the idea of systematically taking a policy and taking field trips and tearing them apart. I think field trips add a exposure to our students that they normally would not get. Things are shrinking all around us. You know, we can't bring these things to them. You know, for the short time I spent at private school, I always wondered why they tortured us with the ballet and the orchestra and the jazz and, well, that wasn't torture, but like some of the other things that they brought in to expose us to, and it was to enrich us. Now, do I think some kids are not going to choose to go to college because we didn't take them to New York? No, but the exposure to these things, I think, is a betterment of our students, and also a rite of passage, such as the kids who are going on the, or maybe going, on the trip to New York who are in the chorus. They are going on this trip because they're in the chorus. You know, and, you know, whether or not it's aligned to the curriculum, it was something that they earned or rite of passage for that. I would hate to see those types of traditions go away. I mean, you know, you can have fun on a trip that's aligned to the curriculum, you know. It still can be fun. I mean, for God's sake, you're on a bus for 3 hours with your peers, you know. I mean, what's not fun about that? And then you go, and we go walk around New York City. I mean, it can be very fun. And behavior, I don't know, when we really get down to it, is it behavior that sometimes teachers don't want to take the kids to New York all day? Maybe. Is it cost? Could be. Is it really counting the money? I mean, these are all things that teachers have been doing for the past 50 years, 60 years. So those things I don't know. Maybe it comes down sometimes to behavior, and as parents, we need to kind of take some responsibility here and say, hey, listen, if my kids are acting up every day in the lunchroom, maybe it's not a good idea to send them to New York all day with a bus full of kids. Now, that's just me talking about my kids and my family. Maybe not everyone has that conversation at their table, but maybe that has to do with it. Or 30 people show up to tell us to complain about something, but only 5 actually show up for taking responsibility. And you have this Rubik's Cube here of complaints, and what do we do about it? And I hate the idea that we're being tasked to say, hey, there's no more field trips from the table so that somebody else doesn't have to be responsible. Well, I'm not willing to say that. Now, if somebody else doesn't want to plan it, great. That's not on me. That's on them. Somebody else doesn't want to be responsible for money. That's not on us. That's on them. And the responsibility has to go, to have that conversation from them. But I personally am not going to say that, hey, these kids who earned it, or like I did, all the kids that were safety patrols went to Hershey Park. And I wasn't a safety patrol. I was jealous. So next year, I stepped up to the plate, and I let people cross the street and not cross the street with the little belt with the badge on. That was my rite of passage to do it. I'm not saying that we should hand the kids everything, but I'm saying we shouldn't be taking away things from them and opportunities to expose them to new things and better things. Just a thought. So as they get older, thank you, as they get older, and we watch the kids that did not go on the trip to the campground, right? And what we heard was this was about camaraderie and sticking together and working together. And I don't know this for a fact, but maybe it's something to pay attention. How are behavioral issues now at the middle school without having that trip? Just something to think about. And I don't know if there is a problem or not a problem, or I haven't asked Dr. Ramage, just curious. Because if they're not learning something and we're not replacing it with something else, how are we expecting to get the same results? It's impossible. So I personally, let's do trips. Let's push field trips. Let's find more trips that are economically make sense, that are in the region, that can get our kids exposed to. I mean, my own daughter said she had never been to Independence Hall, and I thought to myself, I'm a bad parent if she's never been to Independence Hall. And then I thought to myself, well, didn't the school take you to Independence Hall? And no, the answer was no. But like I said, when I went to Independence Hall, I learned something. I saw where George Washington sat, the Speaker of the House sat. I understood something about government. I understood something about this table, about how we do this business. So we can't take these opportunities away from our kids, my personal opinion.
I just want to also point out that both Justin and Dee bring up something indirectly, that there's a bit of a slippery slope here. So if we're going to take away the chorus trip because it's not aligned with the graduation, with the field trip policy, then you're absolutely right. I don't see how you could even remotely make the case that the senior trip is aligned to any educational policy. That's not what it's for. And isn't there a Boston trip sometime? I remember there. I was sure you can go to Boston and make it very educationally aligned, because there's certainly plenty of educational things, but is that what happens when we go to Boston? I just think that I don't think we need to micromanage the trips for the teachers that do want to go, and we do have some teachers that still want to go. So, just take them all away. I mean, that's the logical conclusion to adherence to the policy, is take them all away. But I hate that idea. I really do.
I wasn't suggesting that. I hope you didn't take that from what I was saying. I was just bringing the issue.
It's a logical conclusion. I mean, once you start,
No, it's really not. I just said that it needs to be aligned to the curriculum, and you need to consider the factors that you have articulated in your policy. One of
the senior trip aligned with the policy?
Well, it's not, so maybe we need to amend this policy to include that if that's going to continue to be a tradition. I mean, the board makes the policy, the administration is trying to adhere to the policy, and I guess we're stuck in a conundrum of how to adhere to this policy as we've gotten these issues arise. So we're asking you to clarify the policy for us.
Well, I like the idea of modifying the policy. That, I think, is a fine idea, to allow for a little bit more flexibility on, in situations where you have an organization or teachers that are willing to go through the effort of organizing it. It doesn't solve the problem of the kids who can't afford to go. I don't know how to solve that problem.
Well, and if you do align these things to the curriculum, there could be an argument, and Kyle can chime in if I want. If we're saying this is part of our curriculum, you have to offer it to everyone. You have to allow them that opportunity. Otherwise, we're being discriminatory. So.
But if I could just clarify on the policy, these extracurricular trips, like you were talking about the chorus going to New York, that's an extracurricular trip, right? That's not a class trip, but that's an extracurricular.
No, it's extracurricular, I think, and that's in your.
So that's under the policy. So something like that is allowed.
Well, it says if it meets, it says right in here, if it meets the demonstrated needs and objectives of the organization. That's what you have in the policy currently.
So the teachers would have to demonstrate that it supported the goals of their group.
Right.
So.
Well, we didn't ask, but it sounded like you were implying that trip got turned down. Is that true?
I don't know where, it's the principal makes the decision, and that's what our policy says. So I just asked the principals to go back and review when they get a request, is it aligned to the policy? Until we have a different policy. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I don't think the policy says no field trips. We're just trying to align the trips with the existing policy. So, for example, in this case, the chorus. It wasn't like the chorus decided. There was just a part. I'm not even sure which one of the musical groups. I don't want to speak with misinformation, but there were, along with, say, like a Feola Play 60 group, there were some musicians involved in this. It wasn't necessarily that directly linked. Like, hey, we're the kids who put on the musical. Let's put on the musical together, and then let's go to New York for a field trip to see what a Broadway musical looks like. I mean, that's pretty tight correlation. It's not that kind of a situation. The other thing that I forgot to mention to you, the teacher who did help do some of the initial legwork to see if this trip was a possibility, informed me that the show that they were looking at is not going to run. So even for this initial inquiry, the 200 or so tickets that they thought they had, they no longer even have a show that if we decided we're going to run with this thing on the 16th of May or whatever date they were talking about, it's not even a possibility unless they would somehow come up with another piece. So it is very fluid in some sense that they're trying their best to do these things. We studied Dickens, and then there was a group that went to see, A Christmas Carol. So there are some things that I think align extremely well with the existing policy, but taking a whole grade level for this kind of experience, which has happened, I think one of the reasons why I would say this maybe not the best idea is it doesn't align with our existing policy. There are other reasons you heard about. Cost is a big one for me. I mentioned that before, and I totally agree with Dee on that one. So I think we're just trying to align. We're going to provide experiences that are meaningful and extend the classroom. There are ways with technology to bring some of these things in. We didn't have the opportunity before, but we just want to make sure they are strong educational experiences aligned with our existing policy.
So, Dr. Rabinowitz, are you asking for more flexibility or less flexibility in the policy?
I think the policy actually has some good pieces to work towards an educationally sound experience. I think the difference is with this chatter that was rising up probably alerted us to an existing history that was never really well aligned to the policy. So I'm not asking necessarily for extension at this point or clarification. I think it was just a matter of trying to be sensitive to some of the communication that was or wasn't occurring, to just have the broader discussion, I think, was the idea for this evening's agenda item.
So are we asking, do we support this policy?
I'm merely bringing to your attention that this is the policy that you have, and our job as administrators is to enforce the policy, to create the procedures that align to the policy, which we have, and then use those as we administer and oversee this work. So that's what we're doing.
So-
And if you think that there's something amiss in here, because we do review, and because of the chatter that we've had, that makes it prudent for us to review the policy, and if you'd like us to review it, and certainly in this conversation, I mean, the senior class trip probably should be something that's a separate line item here. If we're gonna look at this special one-time, once-in-a-lifetime thing that students get, that probably should be an amendment to this policy, because, you know, we've been doing it forever. It's just not clearly articulated in here, and it really doesn't fit under the educational trip. So that might be a suggestion that we make that change.
Could I just ask how, okay, so if we were to amend it to possibly cover, I mean, there's a junior trip to Boston and in the past, and a senior trip to,
Well, we have a junior trip at times, but there's very little interest in it, depending on the year, but it's my understanding there's not interest this year.
okay. Send a senior trip to, I mean, how much would we have to change this policy? Is it going to be, and is it just going to be a one-time thing?
You see on page 2, you have educational trip, and then you have articulated the definition. Below that, interscholastic, articulated the definition. Extracurricular. I would say you would add a heading in there that says senior class trip, articulate the reason for that, and that would be permissible under your policy, and I think that would cover that.
Would it be reasonable if we're doing senior class trip and we want to do class trips? Or, you know, would it be reasonable in this policy to articulate other class trips, like possibly a 2nd grade trip, a 5th grade trip, an 8th grade trip, you know?
You can articulate them in here, but we can't force contractually, we can't force our staff to take these trips. They go up. We can allow them to happen, and we're not saying that they're not happening now. We're simply bringing to your attention that if a teacher then doesn't want to take the trip again, and we can't get another group of teachers that want to take the trip. And the other thing to understand is, let's just say a group of 4th grade teachers, they've been taking the trip to the circus, and then they don't want to take it anymore. I can't pull teachers from 3rd grade and have them run the 4th grade trip and then move my 4th grade teachers to 3rd grade, because the disruption to the educational environment becomes exacerbated. And that was what was happening with the 5th grade camping trip a lot of the time, multiplied by the fact that the teachers didn't want to do it. They felt there were safety issues. They felt there were liability issues. Even with the Washington, D.C. trip, and Yolanda reminded me of this, the teachers felt that there were safety issues, and they were concerned about those children in those groups all day long. And Mr. Becker also brought the same thing to my attention with the New York trip and the 6th graders, that was a concern for the people that went on that trip. And it might not have been for you if you had your son with you, but for some of the other adults, and being responsible for 200 of them, not just one, they really did have a little bit of concern about that. And
It's a valid
understand
concern.
that.
I mean,
It is.
I had one kid in my group that wasn't mine, and you know, it's a crowded place. You take your eye off that kid for a second, and you freak out. I mean, you know, totally understand that concern. It's valid.
Well, I think from what we hear, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're good with the policy. We would like for you to enforce the policy, but still have the flexibility for the trips that have been, because it does allow for flexibility in the way it's written now, which I don't feel as though we want that language to change. So does that mean that there's going to be a New York trip? No, but there could be, as long as it follows the policy and we have people that are willing to do it. We don't want to make anyone do anything that they don't want to do, of course, but we don't want to also not have a place in our policy that has the opportunity to do it either. So I think by just leaving it like it is, it gives us the flexibility for us to come up with sensible trips, reasonably priced if that's an issue, and still have our students, you know, getting out of here every once in a while to see the rest of the world.
I'm not sure that what we've been doing all the way through aligns with this policy, though. I think this policy does need some modification. I mean, I've been on a lot of field trips with my sons as they've grown up through elementary school, and I don't think that going to the zoo really aligned to anything in kindergarten.
So what I'm saying is, we're giving them, the policy though says trips should be aligned to the curriculum. Whether or not, we haven't been doing that, is what I've been
But
hearing.
what I'm saying is we should change the policy to match what we're doing a little bit. I mean, why take away the zoo trip too? And, you know, and.
But the zoo could align to the policy, to the curriculum?
Could, but it doesn't really.
But then you just do an animal, you just do a little pre-work and a little post-work, and then it's part of the curriculum. So it can easily be part of the curriculum.
I don't know if it's that loose, but I'm just saying,
Right.
like, you could, and it might not necessarily be the zoo, it could, I mean, we're talking about, again, we have flexibility, you know, to do things that are within the policy, maybe not the traditional things, but, you know, New York every year, this every year, but there's something or things that we're doing each year. Am I correct?
You are correct, and I just wanted to point out, I just noticed on page 8 of 9, that the senior class trip is actually covered here because you talk about overnight trips, and then under number 2, where it says 2 categories of overnight trips, it speaks in there about class trips. So you don't really have to add anything, it's in there, it's the senior.
Okay, having read this, it seems to me like it's a good policy. I think it, like Justin said, we just need to enforce the policy that we have.
With velvet gloves. Is there any public comment, marshmallow gloves, any public comment on field trip policy? Or any of the policies that we discussed tonight? No? Okay.
I'm here to give you your quarterly update on the construction progress. Part of my dress, I was expecting a blizzard today, so I wore my blizzard attire.
It is cold out there.
It's going to get colder.
Yeah.
So looking at the phasing schedule, as we know, this was phase 1A, 1B, which you're occupying now. We're working on the new gym, the cafeteria addition. We're working in this area here, which was your music areas. And we're working in where the AD is going to move and these team rooms. I should say the contractors are working. So here's some progress in the gym. There's interior walls in the gym. This is the exterior walls in the gym. In this particular area, this scaffolding is set up over what was the instrumental music room. So that was one of the reasons it was a good idea to move them out of the instrumental music, because there was a lot of work going on above that area. Here they're doing the fascia around the existing, the new gym, and the yellow one there is a vapor barrier. They're getting ready to put the finished brick up. They're putting the roof on. Of course, that's been held up because of the weather. Once this roof is done, they're going to run temporary electric in the new gym, and that should address the lighting we brought up at our last meeting. So we can bring the electric in. Remember I said we'd have to find some panels. So once we get that temporary electric in here, we'll be able to put those lights up and light that area up a little bit. Here, they're working in the team rooms. In the gym lot will be toilets. They're putting the finishes in. There's some ceilings going in. The fixtures will be installed. You can see finishes in the team rooms. The toilet rooms have been piled and done. And this is the fitness room. Part of the work in the fitness room was to tear out the floor in there and install a topping in there to bring it up to a new level because it had a wood floor in there. So we put the topping in. The roof has been put over that. Remember I came to you about the decking. The deck has been installed. The roof's been put on. And they're putting new roof over the other areas. Now, going back to, I just want to go back to this plan for you, this phasing plan. Pardon me for going back. I just want to point something out. This was scheduled to be turned over to you at the beginning of the summer. But the progress has moved along pretty well, that it looks like the contractors are going to give that back to us in time for your spring sports. So it seems like it's going to be a benefit for your athletic department. They've been really putting up with a lot through this construction, more than a lot of other people. So the contractors are telling me they'll have this ready, as well as by mid-March, the instrumental music area will be turned back over to your department. So.
I just have a good question.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I see a lot of brick there. I thought we were supposed to have glass.
You will have glass.
You will have glass?
Yes,
For
yes.
the one side?
Some of the photos I didn't get back,
Oh,
but
okay.
there will be glass, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is where I left off. The re-roofing has started over the existing building. Of course, that's been held up because of the snow. You can see some of it got done. This is the, what is the fitness room now. Now this is the music area. This is part of the work that was done as the change order I came and talked to you about at our last meeting. So they got the decking in. Remember last time I showed you the photo that was wide open to the tunnel? That's been done, and the concrete has been placed. So that went very well. We acted quickly. We got that. The contractors got that done. They're putting some interior footings in that music area for the partition walls. Moving along on the HVAC, more units have been set. The contractor has been planning these during times of no school. So whenever there's a holiday, he sets up a bunch of areas that the roof can be cut open, curbs put in, and the unit set. So this was all done during the Martin Luther King holiday. And here's one unit. If you can see back here, this is Ringing Rocks. So that unit is set on the work that has to be done this summer. So as much as they can get done without disrupting their programming during the school year, in anticipation of the summer work they've been trying to do. Here is the piping that I came to you last time and told you that had to be replaced, and you gave us the go-ahead to do that. So during the Martin Luther King holiday, thankfully it was warm enough that they shut the hot water off coming to this building. Friday afternoon, Dave, it was Friday afternoon, they shut it off, and we went through that whole weekend without heat here. And they ran the new piping, and by the time Miss Feola came back on Tuesday morning, she had heat, so.
I came in late Monday night to make sure.
So here's the piping again. It's all been tied in. It's got to be insulated yet. Now moving to the cafeteria, that was moving along quite well. As you know, we had those couple hiccups with some unforeseen conditions there. They overcame that. They got the foundations in, the steel was erected, the roof decking's on, and winter really set in on the contractor. So you can see here are some of the footings being installed. The steel got erected very quickly. The decking's on. And it's all ready for roofing. Okay, so the next step is to get the CMU footings in, but again, we need the optimum temperatures. It doesn't look like it's going to be cooperative this coming week and next week because it's really going to get cold. So here is the water line relocations that we talked about before. This was all done over the Christmas holiday, the Christmas break. This is the existing line going into the school, and they were running the pipe, making the last bit of connection here. Here's the fire line that had to be relocated under existing storm piping. And here you can see it's completed. This is the post indicating valve. So all of that's completed, it's all backfilled. That went very well. So that's pretty much that. Anybody have any questions? Thank you.
Very exciting, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanna. On the next two items, Dave, I think we were just going to briefly mention the chiller project, and the food service was supposed to be an FYI, but I think Lori left it on, so maybe you can just give a quick update and we can move on to the budget. I
Yeah,
think that's
the-
what everybody's waiting for.
The one thing I want to point out with the middle school chiller project, we did have our bid opening on Friday for that project. As you recall, we had authorization to solicit proposals in the fall. The budget for that work was $125,000. When we opened bids on Friday, we had an apparent low bidder of $95,400. Unfortunately, they were about $40,000 less than the next closest bidder, and that usually means there's a problem with the bid. And today, we got notice that they were withdrawing their proposal. So at our next meeting, we will be coming to you with a recommendation to award the contract to a company named Shannon Smith. The cost proposal is at $131,491, so it's a little bit over our budget. But the other three of the four that were that bid on the project ranged between $131,491 and $145,200. So that's the apparent cost of the project at this point in time. So we'll be seeking your approval at the next meeting. Be happy to answer any questions on that project if anybody has any. And as Shellie said, the food service RFP is just an RFP, and we can discuss that at a future meeting. So I guess next up would be my budget presentation then.
Just the RFP goes out, what's the time, when does it go out?
The process with the food service RFP is very cumbersome. Before we can send it out, we actually have to get PDE to bless the RFP. So we hope to be sending our documentation up to Harrisburg in the next week or so. Then we have to wait until they get back. So it'll be sometime in the spring. We have to have the contract let before the end of June.
Okay.
This year, Dave and I have been collaborating very closely about this budget, and we've been trying to work to bring you a budget and bring you the information in a way that's as transparent as possible with the most information we can present. So I just wanted to begin the presentation, then I'm going to turn it over to our expert, and just talk briefly about the fact that, are you running it, Dave?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Just talk briefly about the fact that as we build the budget and we sat down together and talked through our process, and we wanted to ensure that we were focused on our mission, and that as we built the budget, we wanted to keep this in the forefront of what we do every day. And we work with our cabinet to ensure that they understood that we're building this budget to support the district and to support the students in the district and bring you the best possible budget that we can. So that being said, we also reviewed our district goals. And I know you've seen these goals a million times, but we have four main goals for the district that were built based on our comprehensive plan. One is to align our curriculum to the standards. One is to incorporate effective instructional strategies in every classroom across the district. One is to focus on our at-risk learners and identify the appropriate supports for those learners. And the last goal is based on building a shared vision for the community and a positive school climate. And we honed in on communication and trying to work on our communication on the district and present a positive image for the Pottsgrove School District. Coupled with those four comprehensive plan goals, as a board, we added 2 goals for superintendent goals, so all 6 of those are really the superintendent's goals. I think they're numbered wrong, but that's okay. A 6 and a 7, but it's really a 5 and a 6. And one is based on the budget, and last year we heard from you that you would like us to establish a budget process to improve our clarity and transparency and communication, so I did a lot of research, as did Dave, on what other districts are doing to present budgets in a way that's more user-friendly for board members, community members, and so on. So we've been working on that. And then lastly, really efficiently and effectively managing the high school renovation project, and thus we have many steps in place to manage that project and be as fiscally responsible as we can as we bring the best possible project to the district. So with those goals in mind and our mission in mind, we built this budget. And understand that our focus is to really look at building teacher quality, because all of the research will suggest, we're a learning institution, and all of the research by and far will suggest that if you can build the capacity of your instructors, of your teachers, and build their quality and build their expertise, that will go the furthest in bringing results for students in the classroom. Whereas if you have an ineffective teacher, that could detrimentally affect how students progress. So we really put a lot of time and effort into our professional development and also into our materials and resources for our students. And I think you have to click it twice because Lori has her little bells and whistles there. So building teacher quality and providing a modern and relevant resources, which is really the tools for teaching and learning, those instructional tools for both teachers and for students to bring them the best education possible. And we also want to point out that we have dividends being experienced. We've mentioned to you before that we got federal recognition through our Title I designation of being in the top 5% for the state for our Title I schools, which happen to be our 3 elementary schools. We've had a rise in our SPP in every building but one this year, and that is contrary to many of the other districts in the county, but we've been able to move ours forward. We've exceeded our state averages in most of our AP courses. We have the highest growth rates among our struggling learners, so we've been really focusing on trying to build quality for our struggling learners, even though we have a high population of students in need. They are learning and they are growing. And our district elementary students made year-over-year score increases in grade 3 math and reading, grade 4 reading, and grade 5 math and reading. So we're very, we feel very good about the results that we're seeing and the things that we're putting in place in order to get us those results. And we're going to continue to work on that, and that's our focus as we built this budget. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk about the budget process and the timelines, and then get into the meat of the budget.
Thank you, Shellie. Even though tonight's the kickoff of the 2015-16 budget process, we've been working on it diligently for several months now. In October, let's back up even to September. In September, the state issues the Act 1 index. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that later, but that essentially establishes our tax rate increase limitations. We follow that very closely by developing building and departmental allocations for the year based on the number of students that attend each individual school. And that information was distributed to the buildings and the departments in early October. From October to December, the buildings developed their budgets, defined their needs, their wants, their must-haves. And in December, we formed a team of central office leadership that sat with each of the budget managers and reviewed critically their budget presentation. We looked at what they were asking for. We challenged them on why they were asking for certain things and had them justify significant increases in any situation. In December, we also developed our salary and benefits budgets based on the staffing that was in place at that point in time, plus whatever salary increments we anticipate for the upcoming school year. And we develop our revenue budget. So that's what we've been doing over the last 4 months. That brings us to the budget process through Act 1. And I think it's valuable to spend a few minutes just looking at the requirements of Act 1 and the processes so that those who aren't familiar can increase their knowledge base here. The whole premise of Act 1 is tied to the primary election in the spring of each year. In 3 out of every 4 years, that primary election takes place in the third week in May. However, in presidential election years, which will be coming up here in a year or so, it is in the fourth week in April. Pennsylvania likes to be relevant in the primary process, so they move their primary election up. But as a result, everything's tied to that, so our budget process moves back earlier in the year, in those years. So what we will have to do is this month, we have to make a preliminary budget available for public inspection, and we have an opportunity, if the board so chooses, oops, back up, I'm still there, to adopt a resolution to stay within the Act 1 index. What that does for the board is it eliminates the need to have a preliminary budget approved next month. That's about all it does for you. The board can choose to do that tonight if they wish, but since we already have the budget meeting planned for February 10th, you don't get a whole lot of benefit from that. Coming into February, as I indicated, we plan to adopt the preliminary budget on February 10th, and if the board supports the seeking of referendum exceptions, we will have until March 5th to file for those exceptions. Ultimately, we need to adopt a proposed final budget in May, 30 days before we can adopt a final budget prior to the end of June. This is the timeline that's in place every year, and we try and schedule it so that it falls on our board meeting date. So that would be, we expect to have the tentative or the proposed final adopted at our first meeting in May, which would allow us the 30-day time frame for our June meeting that's currently scheduled. Okay. The key component of Act 1 is the index. As I indicated, this defines how much we can raise property taxes on an annual basis. It's comprised of two indices. It's the arithmetic average of the statewide average weekly wage, which is a Pennsylvania index of all wage earners in the Commonwealth. The second component is the employment cost index for elementary and secondary education, and this is a national index that's based on K-12 employees throughout the nation. So you add the two together, divide by 2, and you get your base index. So what I present here is the index over time since the inception of Act 1, and you can see that it ranges from a low of 1.4% in 2011-12 to a high of 4.4% in 2008-9. The current year index is 1.9%. That's the base index. The unique component of Act 1 is that those districts that are poorer relative to the rest of the state have the ability to raise property taxes slightly more. We fit into that category, and Pottsgrove is able to raise their taxes this year 2.4%, which is their adjusted index, without seeking referendum exceptions. So the base decision that you have is whether or not to adopt the resolution to stay within the index or to advertise the budget, which we've already done, and consider seeking exceptions. We have not made that decision at this point in time. We don't have to do that tonight. We can do that at our next meeting.
I'm sorry, Dave. Did you say we have to decide on staying within the index tonight?
If you adopt a resolution to stay within the index, that does two things. It keeps you within the index, and it eliminates the need to have a preliminary budget adopted at our next meeting. but we can have the preliminary budget adopted at the next meeting, and the board can still choose to not apply for the exceptions.
So we have until the next meeting to decide to.
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like the full board here
Right.
before we make that decision, and we have several members absent.
Okay, there's really three exceptions available under the Act 1 that we could look to. One is for school construction, and we do have some grandfathered debt that we could use that could qualify for an exception. However, that was negotiated at a point where the rates were a little bit higher. So I think we can get better rates now. I don't see any need to utilize any of those funds. Special education costs that increase beyond the index would be eligible. If there is any there, we expect that to be relatively small. But the one component that every district in Pennsylvania will have is the increase in the retirement rate contributions, which we do qualify for. This is something I hope we never have to do, but in the case where a district feels that it needs to raise taxes to meet their budgetary needs beyond their index and beyond their allowable exceptions, that district is eligible to submit a referendum question to the County Board of Elections prior to March 20th this year. So that's Act 1. Now I want to talk a little bit about where our funds come from and where they go historically. This information I'm going to share next is based on the 2013-14 school year, and then we'll get into some of the budget for the 15-16 year. Our revenues come from three basic buckets. The local revenue sources, primarily taxes, interest, rental of our facilities, things of that nature. The state, which provides various subsidies, and the federal government, which provides very little, as you can see here, in the grand scheme of things. Of our $59.6 million budget for 2013-14, the local revenue streams accounted for $42.4 million, or 71%, followed by the state at 27%, at $16.2 million, and the federal government 2%, generating about $900,000. So a lot of our requirements are Title I, our education of handicapped students, all come with federal requirements. That's all packed into that $900,000 of revenue that we get on an annual basis. From a historical perspective, you can see that the local revenues have been what has been needed to carry the budget increases over the past 5 years. If you look let me see if I can find my pointer here. There it is. You can see here the red represents the federal revenue, and you can see that's dropped off over the years. In 10-11, we still had some federal stimulus money that we were using. The state revenues have increased over the years, but predominantly that was because of their required increase in their share of the retirement contributions on behalf of our school district. That last year there was approximately $175,000 added into the budget for the Ready to Learn block grant. We hope that that continues as we go forward. Beyond that, revenues from the state government and the federal government are stagnant. And the state's budget is in some degree of crisis. The governor, the new governor, while he wants to support public education, he's going to be experienced. He's going to come into the office with a $2 to $2.5 billion deficit, and the opposing party is going to control both the House and Senate. So it's going to be difficult to get any significant increase in state revenues this year through the budgetary process. Oops. Of the local revenue, which I said accounted for 71% of our overall budget, the purple here represents property taxes. They account for 89% of our local revenues, totaling $37.7 million. The next largest item is the earned income tax. That represented 6%. So those two components added up to 95% of our local revenues. There's a variety of other small taxes, per capita, transfer tax, things like that. They play into it, but 95% is comprised of property taxes and earned income taxes. And the only one that we can really control is the property tax number. State revenue comes from a variety of subsidies. I'll let you look at these at your leisure. You will see on here the retirement and Social Security subsidies. The state is required to contribute approximately 50% of those components for each of the school districts throughout the state. And the rental and sinking fund payments is the component that the state contributes for school construction. It would be called our Plan-Con reimbursements, if you will. I'll talk about that a little bit later. From an expenditure standpoint, we carve up our expenditures in a variety of different ways, so please don't look at this and say I have too many percents up here. But salaries and benefits throughout the district account for 2/3 of our budget. Likewise, we spend 2/3 of our budget on instructional costs. That includes the majority of those salaries and benefits, but it also includes our textbooks, our tuitions, things of that nature. And you can see here that approximately 51% is devoted to regular education and 16% towards the special needs programs. The next largest expenditure is debt service, which accounts for 9% of our overall budget. Graphically presented, salaries last year were $26.6 million. Benefits were $15.2 million. So those two components added up to just shy of $42 million out of our $60 million budget, and debt service accounted for $6 million. Now we want to talk a little bit about what we're facing this year. And I want to point out that Pottsgrove and every other school district are probably in pretty much of the same situation. Level revenue streams, slightly increasing expenditures. Doesn't make for a good scenario when the revenues don't go up to meet your expenditures. However, we do have some positives. Mercantile tax collections in the area have been relatively strong since Upland Square came on board. That's been a nice shot in the arm, and even though it's not increasing exponentially, there's a positive trend there. Earned income taxes has been coming in somewhat stronger than budgeted over the last couple years. We're hoping that that's a sign that the local economy is improving and stabilizing, and hopefully we'll start to see more of the improvement in the property values and transfer taxes as we go forward. We're also, after having some challenging years as we started our self-funded healthcare program, we're in the second year of what appears to be a very positive trend. So we're hoping that our healthcare expenditures are down again this year, and may be able to provide some budgetary relief as we go forward through this process. We do have some challenges. Obviously, everybody's biggest challenge in the state is going to be covering the increase in the retirement contributions. I'll quantify that for you shortly. We are currently in the process of negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement with our teachers union. They've worked very hard and are very valuable, but they're the largest employee group in the district. Therefore, whatever impact that contract has will be significant to our budget. As I said, due to the challenges that the governor is going to have at the state level, we aren't extremely confident that we're going to be able to maintain our subsidy levels at the same level. We hope to. We don't expect very much increase, if any. And finally, charter school tuition increases. And I'll deal with that shortly as well. As I went through the budget, it was very simple to quantify what's given rise to our budget shortfall this year. Basically, there's some minor changes in revenue, and there's some changes in expenditures. The three components that are on the screen right now comprise more than the entire increase in expenditures this year. Why I'm putting that out is that we were able to hold the rest of the expenditures down, but these items are growing because there's some, I don't want to say out of our control completely, but they're either contractually obligated or defined by something beyond our control. Wages in our budget have increased by $823,000. That's 3.1% of an increase in salaries. That does not mean that we're giving our staff 3.1% increases. This is a comparison of budget to budget. As we entered this past school year, the current school year, we identified some needs in some of our special education classes that were not budgeted for, that we had to add. So a portion of this increase is at the addition of staff in the current year. We are recognizing those expenses now, but they have not been reflected in our current year budget. The second component is the retirement increase. The current year increase is 21.1% and just shy of $1.4 million. And we also had a very surprising increase in charter school tuition this year. We've had some minor increases over the years, but this year the enrollment in charter schools took a jump. We're proposing an increase in charter school tuition for the 15-16 year of $320,000, which represents a 30% increase. 20% increase. Did I say 30? I apologize.
Dave, is that to cover what's already happened, or is that anticipating another slight increase?
The majority of the 320 is what has already happened, but we do propose some additional increases in tuitions for charter schools going forward. We always have some additional slots that we factor into the budget, but the majority of this we're also experiencing this year. On the revenue side, as I indicated, the state is required to contribute approximately 50% of the retirement and Social Security contributions. That's the first two items. So we are projecting an increase in revenue of approximately $700,000 from the state. However, there are some negatives. In 2011-12, the state was audited by the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and there were some findings in its school-based access program, in its administration of the school-based access program. Essentially, what I understand is that the Pennsylvania schools were getting more money than other schools in other states, and they wanted to know why. So, in any case, they were cited. As a result, the state changed the provider for this school-based access program. To say it was a challenging couple years would be an understatement, but we had historically been generating $400,000 annually in earnings through our medical-related services to special needs students. We just, over the last summer, had our first final review under the new program with the company known as PCG. And for the 2012-13 school year, we earned $180,000. So we had been budgeting, and we budgeted in our current year $550,000 of monies that we draw down from this fund. We don't think that's sustainable, given that we are only generating revenue of $180,000 a year. So we're proposing to reduce our revenue in this year's budget from access from $550,000 to $350,000. We do have some money in reserve there, but if we draw it down too rapidly, we'll run out very quickly, and then we'll be faced with a more difficult situation. Next is our rental subsidy, our PlanCon reimbursements. And as we pay off our debt on our prior projects, we save, or even refinance, we save the expenditure, but we also lose some of the revenue that is generated from those projects. So right now, we're projecting a $180,000 reduction in the PlanCon subsidy. Please remember, with the high school project, we entered into that project during a moratorium period. So we're not scheduled to receive any PlanCon reimbursements on the high school project. I did testify at a hearing last summer regarding this, and there is some support out there. It hasn't been reduced to legislation at this point in time, but there is some support to try and help those districts that couldn't wait for the project until the moratorium ended to gain some funding back. We can hope, but there's no guarantees that that'll happen. So where do we stand right now? Assuming no tax increase, we're facing a budgetary shortfall of $2.5 million. Now, a portion of that was planned. We intended to use $750,000 of the money we set aside to offset the retirement rate increases. And if we were to raise our property taxes to the index, the adjusted index set forth by Act 1, that would generate $928,000 approximately, leaving us with a budgetary shortfall at that point in time of $841,000. We expect, with some rough calculations, that we would be entitled to $448,000 approximately of additional exceptions if the board would support doing that, which at that point in time would bring us down to slightly under $400,000 of a deficit as we stand here today. Obviously, We're very early in the process. This is the first blush. We'll be doing a lot of presentations, a lot of discussions over the next several months, a lot of refining of the budget, but that's where we stand today. Looking at the next slide, what impact that tax increase would have on the local, on the average taxpayer. At the Act 1 limit of 2.4%, that would be a millage increase of 0.9 mils, or roughly $108 for the average household. Excuse me. The exceptions, assuming we were granted them, would allow us to raise taxes by an additional 0.43 mils, or an additional $52 for the average homeowner. So what needs to be discussed for our next meeting, or what needs to be considered before our next meeting, is whether or not the board would support applying for the exceptions. My personal recommendation is that applying for the exceptions doesn't hurt anything. It provides the board with the flexibility. We don't know what the new governor is going to be able to do budgetarily. We don't know what the new Congress and new budget is going to look like. By applying for the exceptions, you at least have some flexibility that if needs arise, you can raise the taxes to cover those needs. But that's ultimately the board's decision to make. So at that point, I'll take any questions.
Regarding the access funds, we can't be the only ones who have this problem. Is that true?
Yes, it's been a tremendous burden across the state. I just saw an email today. I think there's 125 districts that have filed a petition, an appeal against PCG for the calculation, including us.
So, of course, there's never any guarantees, but at least there's hope that the state might address this particular issue, no?
There's always hope. I don't mean to diminish that. Kyle may even be able to weigh in a little bit on that. I don't know if you have any information on.
I don't have any insights into the progress of the action right now. I'm aware, as I was actually going to say almost the same thing that Dave said, which is that there is this action that's ongoing at this point. My office is representing a number of districts, including Pottsgrove. And then there are other law firms that are representing other districts as well. And there's a lot of progress being made, but I don't know exactly where we stand right now.
I just find this particular problem to be really onerous, because what we're talking about is funding for our students who are most in need. And it's abhorrent that the company that the state of Pennsylvania has engaged has essentially withdrawn funds that are that only cover the costs of severely autistic children and other children with the most need. And it's just really a sad comment on the politics of this state that this is being allowed to occur. And I'm hopeful that somebody will realize what a terrible mistake it is and the impact that it will have on children across the state who are most in need. So sorry to go off on my rant there. I also just want to say I think I'm hoping that we'll agree to wait on the decision about exceptions until the next meeting, when hopefully all 9 of us are here. But I do want to say that I disagree with providing ourselves the flexibility. I'd like to stay within the 2.4% and figure out how to make it work. I think that even 2.4% is too much for this community, but I disagree with the notion that there's no harm in requesting the exceptions up to 3.6%. I think if we send a message to our community that we're going to stick with the Act 1 index and make it work, it will have a positive impact on everybody in the district. It'll have a positive impact on the economy of the district. It'll send a message to the community that the school board remains vigilant about doing everything it can to make tax increases as low as possible. So I'm hoping that I'm not the only one who feels that way, but either way, it would be my intention to make a motion at the next meeting to stay within the Act 1 index of 2.4.
I had 2 questions, and this might be just a kind of getting down into the nuts and bolts of things, but during the budget process, you said the buildings and departments begin building their budgets, and I know that the buildings and departments come and make their presentations to us, and this was, as you were talking, this was just something that, a question that came to mind. And there may be more departments than just the music department. I'm just very familiar with the music department, so therefore that's how I'm framing this question. The music department, for example, has, and I'm sure like special needs and things like that, pupil services. The music department has kind of overarches several different buildings. So there are, staff that move between the buildings, instruments and equipment that it's moved between the buildings. Is their budget a separate budget? Do they have a department budget, or is it allocated within the building budgets and then they have to figure out how to share it? Does that make sense, that question?
Yes, yes. For years, when I started here, the music budget was controlled by the building administrators, so part of the school budget. For several years, we had the building, or we had the music, we pulled the music out of that and set it up as its own departmental budget. That didn't work any better. And we were having a hard time finding an administrator who could oversee the needs K-12. So last year it was returned to the oversight of the principals. So like a principal would evaluate the needs to improve the math or science curriculum, they would look at the needs of the music curriculum. So right now it's within the control of the building administrators.
My other question is, last year at budget time, there was a lot of discussion about unfunded mandates. And I think we even sent a letter, I can't remember who we sent the letter to, expressing our concerns about unfunded mandates from the state and the federal government. And as I was looking at this budget and saw the minuscule amount of federal monies that we get compared to the mandates that I'm sure accompany all the Title I, do you have any idea about how much of our budget is due to unfunded mandates, either from the state or from the federal government?
That would be very hard to quantify because it's weaved so completely through our system at this point in time. I can tell you one of the newest unfunded mandates that's come out is a legislation called Pass the Trash. Don't pass the trash, I guess it is, right? and this is requiring all volunteers to have clearances, and it's putting procedures in place that when you hire somebody, you have to contact every prior employer and have them complete a form indicating that they were not investigated for certain offenses while they were employed there, before you can hire them as somebody who works directly with students. So, I mean, we had a series of protocols in place in our hiring process, and they just got stacked on at this point in time. Significantly more data that we have to collect when we're hiring somebody, but additionally, a lot more work that we have to do when somebody seeks a job in another district. So that's one scenario, and that's not directly related to the actual educational component, but certainly No Child Left Behind and a variety of the special ed mandates. You know, most of them are things we should be doing, but there is a lot of unfunded components there.
This access thing is also a reverse unfunded mandate, because we have to provide a free and appropriate education to these kids. Basically, they've just cut our funds by more than half to cover these costs that we're mandated to provide. So that's another example.
I'd like to just add that as much as I think most of us want to support Rick in doing what the community would like to see and try to keep the increase to the basic index, I think we would still not be doing our jobs here if we didn't still look into the future a little bit and see what other needs might be there. For example, I think as Dave has given us the numbers here, that increase in wages, I think, does not include anything from what might occur from a new teacher's contract being signed. So, for instance, if we were to give the teachers any more, that would further just increase the deficit we're currently looking at. So, even though we might not want to include any exceptions values, we might need to for that type of reason. So, just keep that in mind.
Any other comments? The one thing we're not going to take, this is in our new format, just a workshop, and we probably want to resist the urge to, unless it's necessary, to approve anything, especially of this nature on a night like tonight. So we're going to hold off until the next meeting. And does anyone else have any other comments? With that, we're going to move on to curriculum and academic affairs. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there any other public comment about the budget? I'm sorry. No?
Good evening, everyone. So I'm not sure how you follow a budget presentation, but Dr. Ziegler and Michael, or Mr. Wagman and myself are going to try to do just that and see if we can follow Dave's numbers, and you're going to include some numbers in there. So tonight we wanted to come to you and talk with you about several things. Those include new courses that we'd like to propose for the high school, for students in the high school next year during 2015-16. We'd also like to have a conversation about grading committee, because I know that's really important. And we'll talk about the progress that's been made in terms of grading practices here in Pottsgrove. And then the third thing, just slipped out of the top of my mind, and I have it right here in front of me, is really talking about an ELA and a math professional development plan that we're putting into place for our folks. You heard Ms. Feola talk earlier about improving teacher quality, and that's something that we'll share in just a bit. So moving forward, what I'd like to do is have Dr. Ziegler talk about some of these new courses in terms of rationale, costs, and how they fit into the larger progression of learning for students in high school.
Good evening, everyone. Over the last year, we've really been trying to bolster our course selection opportunities for students at the high school. We hosted an AP, STEM, and dual enrollment parent night one night last week. We got 90 parents to come out, and we're very encouraged by the course offerings that we're looking at with Pottsgrove High School. I want to walk you through some of those tonight. We're going to look at our advanced placement psychology course, Spanish in the workplace, another advanced placement computer science course, introduction to programming, and project lead the way. The first course, when we look at rationale, when we talked with parents the other night, parents want an increased number of opportunities for their students. They want opportunities that are rigorous and opportunities that engage the interest and job skills that students will eventually face in the workplace. So why are we doing this? It's really to enhance our program. The second one is to increase student selections. It's more important than ever that we're competitive as a public school and a public high school facing the crisis of other options out there. And then finally, the defined sequence of learning to really make sure that we have opportunities at the next level of learning for students who are taking those courses. The first course I'd like to introduce to you is AP Psychology. If you're not familiar with AP, it's Advanced Placement. Students can actually earn college credit, and if they take the AP exam in May and they score a 3 or higher, they can get 3 college credits they can use in an institution of their choosing. So why are we doing this? It's really to increase our advanced placement offerings. Last year we really tried to boost our advanced placement offerings, and this year we're looking at where do we need to grow. Social studies was an area that 4 years students are required 4 social studies classes, but currently there are only 2 advanced placement options for students in social studies. And so we saw that as one key area to grow in. So we put this in here as an option for students. May earn college credit. The costs are $1,000. One of the things that we do is we require all of our teachers to go through the College Board certification process. It's a week-long course that they take in the summertime typically, where they learn how to teach the advanced placement style, curriculum, and coursework in accordance with their standards in advanced placement psychology. Fortunately, there will be no staffing impact. We have enough workload in our social studies department that we can make that happen. This is a nice piece because this can become an elective that students can take, or they can take this in lieu of their current 12th grade economics and sociology course. Supplementing our AP curriculum is AP Computer Science. We believe that AP Computer Science may connect with an audience that would not typically take an AP course. One of the things that we're really trying to focus on at Pottsgrove is to expand the reach of our AP courses, to not let students think that it's just for a certain group of students. We want more and more students having the opportunities and enrolling in these advanced placement courses. Advanced Placement Computer Science falls in line very nicely with our STEM initiative and with the computer digital needs that students will have in the future. This does increase our AP offerings, it increases that digital learning component, and this is an excellent job skill, a high in demand job that's needed and in a college choice that students could take. Benefit, they may earn college credit on this one also if they earn a 3 or higher on their AP exam. This one does have tests and materials that range around $2,500, and the training, again, because we require every single teacher to get that certification, is $1,000. No staffing is needed. We can make this work within this would be a math course, and you can see there that's a math elective that students can take in all grades. The focus would be mostly in 10th through 12th grade. Introductory programming is that sequential component. Maybe before a student takes the AP Computer Science, that they enter into programming, and where you are finding more and more students. Last year, thankfully, you gave us a Intro to Computer Science course. It's a half-credit course, and a lot of attention and likability for that. So we've had some students ask for a programming course. We wanted to fit that in. This is a prep for AP. You can see the cost there is $1,000. Again, we have the teacher selected. We can fit that into his schedule. And this one is open to all grades. Let me back up. I forgot to mention that the AP Psychology and the AP Computer Science would be weighted at 10% of the student's grade. It's another reason students like to take that. Spanish in the workplace, provide an opportunity for a student who doesn't want to take Honors Spanish 4 or our dual enrollment. Right now, we go Spanish 1, 2, and 3, and we do that in Honors, and we do that in non-Honors, or our academic level. But we don't currently have an academic Spanish 4. It's either Honors or dual enrollment. What we wanted to do is provide students an opportunity who just wanted to explore and take Spanish in their 4th year, but didn't want the rigor of a advanced placement course or an honors course to be able to take this. The other piece is, since we have students taking Spanish in the 8th grade, this would provide a 5th year opportunity for students to take Spanish. Cost of this course is $390. We have a teacher that we believe can do this, fits right in their schedule, and it really is a 5th year progression or an elective in the Spanish area. The last one we're looking at is Project Lead the Way. This is basically sequential in the program that we got into, I believe, 2 years ago with Project Lead the Way. With Introduction to Engineering and our engineering course we implemented last year. This is the 3rd year of the Project Lead the Way course selection. And it's sequential, it's in that program. As you can see, it's an honors level course, which is weighted, and it has engineering experience, falls right in line with our STEM. The cost of this is $2,000, and the text and the materials are $16,000. Now you might go, wow, $16,000. That's going to require a lot of digital equipment, electronic equipment, some robotic equipment, and some other equipment that they would be able to actually use in that engineering format. This is really going to be a heavy, intensive engineering course in the area of digital electronics. Our teacher for this, Mr. Regensburg, he goes down to Duke University in the summertime. It's trained through Project Lead the Way. Bucknell, I'm sorry, Bucknell. Thank you. He goes to Bucknell, gets certified through Project Lead the Way, and then comes back and teaches this. No staff's needed, and this is year 3 of the Project Lead the Way.
If I can just add, this is the first of the electives offered through Project Lead the Way. We've now gone through the 2 required courses in the sequence. This introduces the first elective course for the students within that scope of sequence.
Any questions?
Will we be losing any courses to make these work with the existing staff?
We are not losing courses. Well, let me back up with that. CAD 1 and 2 is sort of integrated into these courses, and right now we have low enrollment in those courses, so we will be removing those 2 courses, CAD 1 and 2.
That's it?
Yeah, we actually didn't have anybody enroll in CAD 2 this year. We had like 3 or 4 students enroll in CAD 1. And actually, what they teach in that is, this is much more advanced than that anyway. Other than that, no. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
So the other things that we wanted to talk about, 2 more things. We're really talking about the grading committee and the grading work that we've been doing here in Pottsgrove, as well as math and an ELA PD plan. So what I'll do is fast forward a few slides here, because they're repeats. So if we look at the grading committee, we've spent a lot of time meeting with multiple people. The first thing that we did pretty early on in the year is construct a team of who was going to be on our grading task force. And that team was really charged with looking at the recommendation, looking at what all of you voted upon last year and making that movement true, but doing so not just going from a 7-point scale to a 10-point scale, but doing that very meaningfully, doing it based upon what the best research says that we need to do. So the first thing that we did was put together a team. And you can see our larger grading committee is really a K-12 team. It's representative of teachers, principals, guidance counselors, as well as district office staff at this point in time. And then the next thing that we did was really allocate some times that we have this year to engage not only this committee and subcommittees of this group, but also our larger professional staff in professional learning about what are we finding out about as we research best practices with grading. So you can see a lot of days have been kind of allocated there and have been utilized up until this point in time. So what has been accomplished so far? This group, the larger task force, has met twice, and then the real work really occurs within the 2, we've created 2 subcommittees, a secondary subcommittee and an elementary subcommittee. You can see that their work below, as bulleted, are really similar pieces of work, but they're viewing it through a different lens, if you will. So the secondary folks are looking at this, how are we transitioning from a 7-point scale to a 10-point scale? But they're having very similar conversations in terms of what does that mean in terms of best research. The elementary folks are really looking at, we need to move to a standards-based report card that really reflects what students are learning, what is their achievement, and how are we communicating that on a single document. So we're looking at that. What does that mean both teams are really looking at? There's been a lot of professional learning that they're engaged in. To be quite honest, there's a lot of wrestling of topics that they're engaged in. So we're looking at research and we're saying, what do you think about that? And oftentimes they're topics that may or may not kind of sync with a person's mindset, which is fantastic because it kind of gets us thinking in new ways. From there, we've really developed 4 grading practices, and we're really looking at 4 grading practices together as a team. In the packets that you have, you will see those 4. I think there's a page that I provided for you for each grading practice, all right? And I'll talk about those grading practices here in a minute. The next thing that we were really looking at was looking at creating a Pottsgrove School District kind of guidelines document in terms of what do we believe about grading, how are we moving forward, what are the procedures and protocols we're following. That document, although we have a long way to go, is already in the development. As these teams are meeting, we're putting together this document, we're approving it kind of together as a team and saying, is this what we believe? If so, then let's move forward with that. Okay? And then the final thing that's going on right now, actually, is building a lot of professional development plans for each building. So what does that mean? A lot of, as I said, professional learning is occurring with this kind of committee that we have together. We want to make sure that that intense learning that's occurring translates to the larger staff. So right now I'm working with building principals and the committee to kind of talk about what does that look like in each building. Okay? So for example, on February 13th, both the middle school and the high school are really looking at beginning to have some of these conversations. Elementary schools are following a bit of a different schedule on that particular day, but everybody's building this into their schedule to have these conversations about how are we moving forward. So the next slide I wanted to share with you is I shared with you these 4 grading practices that we've really been talking about, and again, you have those documents before you. As we look at these 4 grading practices, what we've been trying to say as a group is, first of all, do we believe with these? Do we believe with bullet points that are provided below it? And the answer is, as a committee, sometimes yes, and sometimes we say, gee, we have some work to do there. I'm not sure how I feel about that. What does the research say about that? How does that fit here in Pottsgrove, most importantly? Okay? So when we look at these 4 grading practices, I'll go through these one by one and talk a little bit specifically about what each one of them really means. The first is really only including the scores that relate to the achievement of standards. So your first response is probably going to be, well, yeah, right? But this is really looking at, there's a lot of non-academic things that we include when we report. I'm thinking back to when I was in school, likely the same situation for you. When I was back in school, there was a lot of information that showed up on my report card that didn't necessarily reflect me as a student in terms of achievement of standards. So for example, I always participated in class. Did that really show how I was achieving? I always put forth my best effort. Did that mean I was achieving to the standard? Okay? Now, I'm not saying that those pieces aren't important. They are incredibly important. We need to do a better job of separating the 2 out so that we can have very informed conversations with parents and students and teachers. Here is where we are in terms of achievement. Here's where we are in terms of characteristics of a successful learner. Okay? Another thing that falls under there is really the idea of extra credit or bonus points. So why is that important? What we're really interested in doing is providing multiple opportunities for students to show their learning. Okay, so as soon as you say, well, we're going to provide extra credit, you're no longer assessing what you set out to do. It's really about saying to a student, I want to make sure I provide you multiple opportunities to provide me evidence that you're moving forward with your understanding of this particular standard. Second one is use a variety of assessment methods to collect high-quality, organized evidence of achievement. Okay? So again, as I said, was important. Not only are multiple measures that are important, but multiple opportunities for students to show the way. So that doesn't mean they're always taking a test. It means I have multiple opportunities to show my understanding of a particular idea. It means using quality assessments, for example. That's part of our ongoing curriculum process, that we're looking at all of our assessments, making sure that they do what we set out for them to do, that they are in fact reliable. Grading practice 3 is kind of the, I'll call it the meat. It's probably where many people kind of get most interested in terms of when we talk about grading practices. That's use appropriate grade calculation. So this is really, how do we put it all together? Does it look like percentages? Does it look like a 4-point scale? Now, I don't have any of the answers for you tonight because this committee is still going through it. Their goal is to come to you with recommendations later on this year. And in fact, they're meeting tomorrow afternoon on our Act 80 day to continue to have a conversation actually about grading practice number 3 and number 4. So we continue to move forward in that particular direction. And then grading practice 4 is use grading and assessment procedures that support learning. Okay? So what is that all about? It's really looking at the most current data that you have available for students. So if you have something from last semester that no longer is important because it no longer shows a child's true reflection of that idea, it's no longer relevant information. And it's really about including students within the process. Okay? So these are some heavy ideas that I share with you, and underneath each of them there's probably about 800 procedures that need to be outlined in terms of what do we believe about homework, what do we believe about zeros, providing a 0 for a student, what do we believe about extra credit, and we're working through all of that. Again, that all will be recommendations that we provide to you later on. So where are we going from here? Our next steps are really a couple things that we need to do. Our subcommittees are really working right now to kind of work through these grading practices. They're continuing to develop that PGSD grading guidelines document, because that's going to be critically important and probably a good piece of the recommendations that we come to the board with. Another piece is the ongoing professional learning. I spoke about what we're doing right now in terms of professional learning and spreading the work of this committee out to all of our staff so that they have familiarity with it. The other thing that the committee mentioned is it would be really important, and they feel it would be important, to have kind of that external expert speak about this. Okay? So Ms. Feola and Dr. Shirk, who has done some grading work in a previous district, and I and Mr. Wagman were researching and thinking about what are some of those external speakers that we could bring that could communicate a message and really talk, when we talk about best practices, it's not Mr. Vorse's idea, it's not Mr. Wagman's idea. These are people who have tested it time and time again in school districts all over the place that look like Pottsgrove, that look different from Pottsgrove, and what they find is there's certain grading practices that the most successful schools and the most successful students follow. So we believe Thomas Gusky might be that person that could provide our staff with that availability. In your packet, I provided for you a bio of Tom Gusky. He really is a guru in this particular area. And looking at the cost, we believe that we could provide an opportunity where we could bring him here on April 1st on a staff development day to engage all of our staff in. And that would be approximately about $45 per staff member. Okay? If we were to send our staff members out to see him, it would be exponentially more expensive. Go ahead.
I just want to add, I've seen Dr. Gusky present, as I've seen many other researchers, and he truly is a great presenter, and I think it will resonate with our community and our teachers in that he's a university professor and has done abundant research on this grading practices, grading in general, and how that plays into moving into college. And I know that was kind of the impetus behind this issue coming to the surface, and I think that he would be able to bring us some information that might help us understand the issue and what colleges look for and how that affects an application process. But also, he's done all the research on these effective grading practices and can help us kind of get that resonated with our staff on how we want to move forward in terms of our guideline book. So that's why we're recommending him. And also, in speaking with him about this, he said, you know, if you're going to bring me here, the board should be involved. You should really invite them to come and participate. And not only would I like to invite the board members to come and participate, I would also like to invite some of the key communicators that we have in that key communicators group, especially those who are quite interested in grading, like Mr. Leach, who happens to be a key communicator and interested in grading, that perhaps we have some of our community members participate if we're going to bring him forward. So I just wanted to interject that piece.
Moving forward from there, what we would be doing is looking at developing, as I said, this guideline book, but really specifying what are recommendations we believe, looking at all the research, here are the recommendations we believe we need to do to move forward. We presented to the board, I believe in May is our timeline. And then we'd be kind of in an ongoing evaluation of that, because you saw a couple things. We're certainly moving forward next year with the transition from the 7-point scale to the 10-point scale. The standards-based report card at the elementary level may not occur, probably will not occur next year, because what we're in the phase of doing right now is examining what is it that we need to report, and then looking out to multiple other districts who have gone through this process and collecting what those documents look like, as well as blending that with the research and the culture here at Pottsgrove in terms of communicating the most important pieces about grading that we need to. Also in your packet, Ms. Feola and I included 2 articles that are provided by Dr. Gusky, so that you can, with all your free time, you can read up on grading. But they are really interesting reads, and they cause you to kind of stop and go, I didn't realize that. So they're really good documents to look at. So let me pause there, and if there are any questions about where we are with our grading committee.
I just had a comment and a question. First of all, I really want to commend you guys for taking something that would easily have just been, okay, we're just gonna change these numbers and be done with it. And instead of doing that, taking our discussions that we had here at the table regarding all of that, finding out why, really getting into the meat of what this change would mean, and turning it into something that's going to be, it sounds like, really helpful for every student in the district, for all the children. So I appreciate that you, instead of just, flinging out a couple numbers, that you've really turned this into a professional development thing that sounds like it's going to be really wonderful for our district, that it's going to leave us, it's a lot of work, but it's going to leave us much better than where we were before. So my question is, so far with your committee, how do you gauge staff acceptance? I know one of the concerns was, it's a lot of work to implement new practices. So far with those that you have on your committee, how is that received?
It's a good question, and we have to understand that it's a small representation of our larger staff. And in many cases, what has occurred is there were conversations, frankly, we asked building administrators to say, bring us those people who are both going to be the people who are very, very traditional, if you will, in terms of mindset about this is how I was graded back when I was in elementary school or high school, and I want to stay in that particular area. And we asked for those people who are going to be on the other side of that continuum. So, because we want to have those really engaging conversations at the table. We did not at all want it to be kind of a one-sided conversation. So we have to understand it's a very representative group. As we move forward, and as we're developing these plans within each building, probably within the next month, I'll be even able to provide more information about that in terms of what is the staff reaction to some of this professional learning. I can tell you the way in which I feel good about the way in which we've designed it, because it's been a lot of conversation based upon research. It's been a lot of, what do you think about this? How does that resonate with you? How does that challenge your thinking? And we told them very upfront, look, we're going to expect you to challenge your thinking as part of this. So I have no reason to believe that the rest of the staff will kind of have those same conversations. But I won't lie, some of the ideas could be very different from what they're currently practicing. It's just a matter of trying to put everybody on the same page.
So let me just say that I don't yet have an opinion about these ideas, other than to say that just reading through them and listening to you speak about them, some of the changes would be fairly radical in comparison to how we do things now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it would be maybe profound is a better word. And I won't go through the individuals, but just I was making mental notes as you were talking about them. First question is, are these grading practices research proven to have an impact, a positive impact on the performance of students? I understand that Mr. Gasky is a researcher, but have they been implemented and proven to work?
It's an excellent question. Part of his work, and probably, well, actually part of many researchers' work, is not only that research piece, but also what does it look like in practical implementation within a typical school district. So what does that mean in everyday language? It means that they're taking these, what they do is they go in, they investigate schools, they say, gee, you have some of these great grading practices that seem to be occurring. Your teachers seem to be really on board. Your students really, when I say, hey, what did you do at school today? It's not the typical, I don't know, mom, or I don't know, dad, or I don't know, grandpa. They're able to talk almost standard by standard about what they had accomplished that day at school. So what does that mean? Dr. Gusky and other individuals have worked with these schools and said, what are the most effective grading practices? What do all those schools have in common, if you will? What do all those most effective schools have in common in terms of grading practices? And they uncover these 4, which include many other things, to your point, about what are those things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So are they tried and true? Yes, they are. There's research behind them that shows kids achieve at higher levels.
So if I just heard you correctly, what you're saying is they went to schools that are doing this already and concluded that since they're doing very well, it must be the grading practices that are the reason for their success.
No, that's not
exactly what I said. It sounded a lot like what you just said.
So, well, we have to remember that when any research is going to a school, when they're looking at effective practices, it's just like kind of like the conversations we have at Key Communicators, and we say, hey, why did we have that particular growth in that particular area? Or why are we still here? It's really hard to pinpoint a particular one variable and say, that's the variable that had the impact. Because as you know, here in Pottsgrove, we have so many things that we're doing, and it's hard to say, that's the one thing that we did that shows achievement in that particular area. So, what they do is look at it through a grading lens. They practice these things in schools, and they say what works and what doesn't work. So it's not just in addition to going to the school and seeing what they're doing well, it's doing research about this, trying it in a school, seeing how students react, seeing how teachers go through the process.
Well, one way would be to take a school like ours that has our current grading practices, that implemented these grading practices, and measure the change, if any. And so is there research like that? Because what you just described didn't sound like that to me. It sounded like, oh, well, you know, there are already a bunch of people doing this, and they're doing really well, and we're looking at what works there and what doesn't work there. And to me, that's all anecdotal information. It's not.
Part of the problem, though, Rick, is there's many independent variables that play into it, and it's hard to pinpoint down in an educational setting to just one variable. You can't eliminate every other variable, so there could be other things contributing. But the one thing I think I should mention that I don't think Daniel did is that when we started out with this, we first read about why do we even grade? What is the purpose of grading? And we tried to come up with a definition of why we would grade. And we looked at what other places, why do they grade? Well, it's to provide feedback to a student and to a parent to give them a clear picture about what it is their child or they themselves are learning or not learning. So with that